Well, we've been talking about this ITC report out on USMCA. It's calling it an overall win for the U.S. farm sector, reforming biotechnology and phytosanitary standards, and would allow for slight increases in exports of some U.S. ag commodities, U.S. dairy being one of those commodities that would get a direct bump in exports from USMCA. Joining us now is Paul Bleiberg. He is the Vice President, Government Relations for the National Milk Producers Federation. Paul, thanks for joining us. Certainly USMCA, getting it passed, very important to the dairy industry.
It absolutely is. Thank you for having me on today this morning. And, we are very hopeful that USMCA can move forward in Congress this year. We have already begun making the case for the agreement's passage, and I think our view is that if implemented properly, the agreement will enable us to make some inroads as it relates to market access into the Canadian market, and it will also preserve the access that we already have into Mexico's dairy market. So it's sort of very important from both of those perspectives.
Yeah, we've been talking about that. That's the thing about USMCA. Some will focus on what we gain. That's obviously important, but a big part of it is keeping what we already had.
That's absolutely correct, and I think given all of the dialogue in the last couple of years about different views people had on the original NAFTA and whether it worked, I think, we felt that at least as it related to Mexico, there was a lot to like in the original NAFTA, while there was a lot not to like as it related to Canada. So we see this as a step forward while also keeping the positives.
Well, Paul, obviously this comes at a time when it's very much needed for all of agriculture, but in particular the dairy sector, because it's a struggle right now. And I wanted to talk about some of the dairy assistance programs that are available. There are more available now, and that some of them have been tweaked, hopefully improved. I want you to kind of give us a breakdown and look at what's available and how they can help dairy farmers through these times.
Absolutely, happy to do that. And I think I'd start by saying we were very, very pleased with the Farm Bill that Congress enacted into law in December. It made significant steps forward in the dairy policy space, and I've been doing producer meetings throughout the country this week, actually, and have spent the time highlighting the benefits the new dairy margin coverage program is going to have for farmers of all sizes, really, but especially some much-needed help for small and mid-sized operations, and it is a much improved program over the previous dairy program in a significant way because it's going to trigger at higher levels of coverage. This was a major reform that we had sought during the process, and we were very happy to work with Congress, with a number of folks in both the House and the Senate, to secure a much better program that's going to trigger at higher coverage levels. It's not the kind of thing that's going to provide people a profit, but it's going to provide a meaningful safety net during the difficult times in a way that the old program simply didn't do that.
What's reaction been to it? What kind of questions were you hearing from producers?
I think the reaction has been very positive and very open-minded. Folks are wanting to understand the differences right now because the old program, didn't perform as well. And so there's, I think, a little bit of skepticism as far as, what's this new program going to be like and how is it going to be different? So our focus has really been, first of all, explaining those differences in a way that's straightforward, but also doing so in a way that connects to the likelihood of the program triggering and making payments this year. We already know that the program was going to pay out in January and February at the $9.50 coverage level in such a way that if a producer signs up the Tier 1 production history for 2019, they're already going to more than recoup their full year premium cost in just those first 2 months of payments. And that's a very important point to make because if the program were still limited at $8 as it had been before, it would have been triggering very little at this point, but we're able to point to folks now, look, this is going back to January 1, first of all. So when it does open on June 17th for sign-up, the payments for the year will be retroactive, but when it does, you're already going to see notable benefit, and given that we anticipate the program is going to trigger for a good number of months beyond January and February, that benefit will only increase.
Now, this year they actually have multiple programs they can look at for assistance.
That's right. There's a combination of changes that have been made in legislation over the last couple of years that relate to allowing new programs to come online, but also removing some restrictions around participating in multiple programs that already existed. So there are programs dairy farmers will have access to now on the risk management agency side that they might not have had access to before. So one of them very simply is a newer program. It's called the Revenue Protection Program, and that's gotten considerable interest in the months since it came online. And that was able to be created and approved by RMA last year because Congress in February of last year passed a law that lifted the statutory cap that had been in place on all livestock insurance products. And so that was a very important step that Congress took in tandem with some reforms they made at the time to the margin protection program, which made that program work a bit better for 2018, as we saw evidenced by the sign-up. But as it related to risk management, we were able to get this livestock insurance cap lifted. And first of all, that paved the way for creation of the revenue protection program. And second of all, it paved the way for removal in the Farm Bill in December of a restriction that had existed before that said dairy farmers could only participate in, the Title I farm program or the already existing livestock gross margin program for dairy, which is also run by RMA. If you're a commodity farmer for other crops, you don't have that limitation. You can sign up for ARC or PLC, and you can also sign up for crop insurance. Dairy farmers had this limitation that said they could only be in one or the other. So following the lifting of the cap back in February, we were able to get this restriction removed working with Congress and the Farm Bill. So if you're a dairy farmer now, not only do you have the ability to sign up for the newly improved dairy margin coverage, you can sign up for the livestock gross margin program. You can also sign up for the revenue protection program. So the range of options that dairy farmers have is much greater than it was before. Even though a couple of these programs existed in one form or another, they were treated as mutually exclusive as far as the producer's choice was concerned.
We're talking with Paul Bleiberg, Vice President, Government Relations for the National Milk Producers Federation. Paul, there has been some discussion in some sectors of the industry talking about perhaps we should look at going to a supply management system for dairy. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I think I would say, certainly from the National Milk Trade Association perspective, we have a lot of different voices in the association, and there are also a lot of different voices in the dairy industry at large. Our focus right now has been on delivering as tangible and strong policy gains for dairy farmers as we can possibly deliver. And to give a little bit of perspective, at least from my lens on this, I was not at National Milk as an employee during the debate around the 2014 Farm Bill, but I was a congressional staffer at the time for a House member from Wisconsin who sat on the House Agriculture Committee during the 2012, 13, ultimately 14 Farm Bill debate. And so I had a pretty good front row seat to the debate around supply management and market stabilization that took place at the time. And as you'll recall, and many of your listeners will recall, National Milk had proposed a version of market stabilization or supply management in that Farm Bill. Dairy processors were opposed, and there were a number of different divisions there. And, the end outcome of the 2014 Farm Bill, not only was there not an element of supply management, but the safety net program that came out of it, didn't turn out to be as effective as producers had hoped, and in many ways it wasn't effective at all. And so I think we set out going into the 2018 Farm Bill process to say, look, we've really got to fix this program and make sure that dairy producers have a workable safety net across the country. And I think we knew we really had to zero in and get those details right. One of the things that I felt as a staff member on Capitol Hill during that Farm Bill process prior was that so much of the oxygen had been taken up by the debate around supply management and whether it was good or bad policy, that there wasn't a lot of discussion put in, at least for some folks, on the details of the safety net. I think there was sort of a general agreement that people favored moving to the margin insurance type program, and there were a number of details that had to be ironed out. But, I could be wrong, but I wonder if it would have been a greater opportunity to hash out those details had it been the focus. So I think going into this last Farm Bill that we just completed in December, we felt it was imperative to make sure we came out of that Farm Bill with the best possible safety net we could have for dairy farmers of all sizes, in addition to a setup that gave dairy producers access to multiple risk management tools for the question that we just talked about.
All right. Well, the bad news is there's a need for these types of assistance programs. The good news is there are more available, and they are improved from what we've seen in the past, right?
That's absolutely correct. The dairy margin coverage program is a major improvement. It has higher coverage levels available at more affordable premium rates, and it's also a much more flexible program in relation to, how much producers have to cover and how much they have to put in at different levels. And I think that's taken in tandem with the new revenue protection program at RMA, as well as the greater access now to livestock gross margin dairy. The removal of that cap there was very important for that program as well. And, we're continuing to work closely with the Department of Agriculture and with Congress to make sure that the DMC program is implemented in a timely manner and in a farmer-friendly manner. I think there's great interest on all parts in the House and the Senate and the Department of Ag in seeing the program move forward expeditiously. So we're continuing those efforts and look to have more good news soon.
All right, Paul, thank you.
Thank you.
Paul Bleiberg, Vice President, Government Relations for the National Milk Producers Federation, here on AOA.